When we think about forests, we think about trees usually, right? And this is what we have in our minds. Usually it's, it's easy that we forget that these forests, these watersheds are drained by small, tiny streams. Those are the type of streams that I'm talking about. Those streams, you can wade them during summer without wetting your feet. And there are a lot of them. In fact, we have recent estimates that they cover 90% of the stream length. It's composed by these tiny streams. These tiny streams also, because they are clean, the water is really clean, we forget that they transport a lot of things in them. Some of these things is nitrogen. And this has some implications for downstream, for the organisms that we can find within these streams. For instance, this is the Geandrius, several watersheds here. Can you see here? Yeah, it would be better probably. So you can see Mac Creek. Mac Creek, it's, during 1 year, can transport 1,000 kilos of nitrogen. It's quite a big amount. Other watersheds, smaller ones, like Watershed 1 here in this part, it's about 80 kilos of nitrogen per year. This not only happens with nitrogen, but also with carbon. So today I will talk mostly about carbon. Carbon, we have good idea of how much carbon rivers in general transport to the oceans. We know that this number is around 0.9, 10 or 15 grams, so that's quite a big number. And the initial idea was that the streams and rivers were like pipes. So whatever was arriving to the ocean was entering from the forests. So the initial paradigm was this one here, the first, like the pipe. During these last 10 years, there has been a lot of research related to climate change and trying to increase the performance of the models, climate models. And the role of streams and rivers and lakes has been becoming more and more evident, more important. So in 2007, in this big paper, they considered that some of this carbon was deposited in the sediments, and some of it was evaded to the atmosphere. 2011, this number increased when they realized that wetlands and lakes and reservoirs were also important. All of these models, though, they don't take into account these small streams because there is no data for them. They are tiny, people overlook them, but if you think about how the coverage in the landscape, they may have a big role. So here's where our story comes. A group of researchers at the Andrews, we decided to work together to do a carbon budget for a small, tiny stream, the stream draining watershed 1. It's a group effort, so there is Roy Haverty, Sherry Johnson, Steve Wenzel, grad students Nick Dodge, Haley, and Rob Pennington, Linda Ashkenas from the Fisheries and Wildlife Department, and Chris Thomas. And this is our watershed. So this watershed, this is a tiny one. It's about 96 hectares. 50 years ago, it looked like that, but then it was harvested and logged and burned. And in 2003, the water chemistry program, the LTER water chemistry, started taking samples, water chemistry samples there. Those are samples that are taken every 3 weeks proportional to stream flow. So they are taken continuously, but if there is more water, they collect more volume of water. If there is less water, they collect less water. And this is, forget about the plot right now. Just focus on the colors, okay? You can tell that each color is a different part of the carbon cycle. For the ones not familiar with the carbon cycle, the idea is that trees capture, a really simplified one, trees capture CO2 from the atmosphere, and they turn it into biomass, leaves and wood. This leaf and wood, at some point, will decay and will go into the forest soil or even into the streams. This is this part here. This is the suspended particulate organic carbon, the brown one. It will break down and it will become tiny particles that can travel with the water, suspended. If we continue this degradation or this breakdown, we will have the dissolved organic carbon. This is the pink one, okay? This one here. The dissolved organic carbon, those are tiny molecules that are ready to be used by the microbes that live into the system, and which will use them as energy and will transform them to inorganic carbon, the green one. And finally, this inorganic carbon, one part of this inorganic carbon is CO2. And this CO2 can be trapped into the stream, with the stream and travel downstream, or can escape the stream and go to the atmosphere. This is the blue one. Okay? Now you can look a little bit better with more detail this plot. So basically what we have here is, in this vertical axis, is the amount of carbon of each of these species. On the other axis, it's stream flow. What we're seeing here, the first thing that we see here is that our stream flow, there is a lot of variability, seasonal variability. So it depends a lot on what time of the year it is to determine how much carbon we'll be transporting and the form in which we'll be transported. Right? So we have a lot of, there is a maximum exports when there is a lot of flow. There is exports downstream and exports to the atmosphere. And also that these forms are continuously changing. This is exactly the same plot that we saw before, the same numbers, but now expressed in a different way. What we are seeing here is the percentage of each of the forms, right? So what we are seeing is that in October, most of this carbon evades to the atmosphere. It's evaded to the atmosphere. In winter, most of the carbon is transported in dissolved forms, in this combination of inorganic, particulate organic, and dissolved organic. So basically what we are seeing here is that all these processes that are happening into the stream, all these transformations, will vary depending on which time of the year we are. And finally, we not only did numbers, summing parts, but we also tried to understand processes. And one of the processes that is affecting carbon in the streams is primary production and respiration. Similar to forests, streams respire, all the bacteria that are in the sediments respire, and the algae produce biomass, so through photosynthesis. This plot here, this is with the same units, kilograms of carbon per hectare per month. Here it's primary production, so the amount of carbon fixed into biomass. This part here is carbon respired, so carbon that it's released from the organisms. What we're seeing in general is that our numbers are pretty low of primary production. This is common for our Pacific Northwest streams because we have not a lot of light arriving into the stream, we have low nutrient concentrations. Respiration, in contrast, is pretty high. It's because, well, our systems are dominated by these heterotrophic organisms that respire but don't produce carbon. And finally, this is the big picture. So putting all these pieces together, we were able to understand how it looks like in a regular year, our carbon exports. Just a note here, so this is 10 years of data. And we were able, with all this data, we were able to understand a little bit more about this interannual variability, what are the factors driving these shifts between forms of carbon, and why one year we have an export of 140 kilograms per liter and per hectare, and another one we have 200 kilograms. But in general, this is an average year. So what we're seeing here is that our organic carbon is entering into the stream. It's transformed to inorganic carbon. Particulate organic carbon, it's falling from the streams, from the trees, or it arrives by wind into the channel. And everything is transformed, and this portion here, this 42.2 kilograms of carbon, are evaded to the atmosphere. The rest is transported downstream, and this is this number here, 114. And just a reference, what we have here is a terrestrial, the amount, well, an estimate of the amount of carbon that the forest can absorb, right? So these numbers in general don't account for this leakage from the stream, using the streams. So one of the points of this paper or this study is that, well, we need to take into account that, okay, forests are absorbing a lot of carbon, but some of it is also leaking, like a small drip, right, through these small, tiny streams. Finally, here you can see that basically what we are seeing is that most of our carbon is transported and processed in inorganic form, which is quite, I mean, there are other studies out there, and for boreal streams, this is totally the opposite, so mostly it's organic carbon. And from it, a portion of it, it's 1/3 of it, it's evaded to the atmosphere. And just think about the area of the catchment versus the ratio of the stream area. The stream area is 0.4% of the whole catchment. And all of that happens in this small area. So basically, as a conclusions, we know that we have shown, or we now understand a little bit better the role of these small streams. They are highly active. They transport a lot of nutrients, a lot of carbon. It processes a lot of carbon. And they are a tiny proportion of the whole landscape. So it's kind of interesting. The annual carbon flux here in this particular watershed is dominated by transport downstream. 27% is evasion to the atmosphere. Seasonality plays a huge role, and this may have implications for under scenarios of climate change. So depending if we're exporting the OC or the IC, we'll have more evasion or less. If temperatures and stream flow goes in synchrony or not in synchrony, might have some implications. And finally, that we need to do a better job. We need to still to study a little bit more. This is one study, but we have tons of streams out there, right? And we don't have a lot of data, a lot of information. What we have seen is that the uncertainty in these measurements is huge, especially when we are trying to track the gas evasion. So this could be another thing to improve. And I think that with that, yeah, if you have questions, do we have time for questions?